and welcome to the Talent LNK podcast in partnership with LincolnHR, where we chat all things talent and workforce. I'm Kaylie Hogan-Schnittker, Director of Talent Strategy with the Lincoln Partnership for Economic Development. Today, I'm joined in the AOI Podcast Studio with David Nguyen, data scientist at the Nebraska Statewide Workforce and Educational Reporting System. We also lovingly call that NSWERS. David, welcome. How are you today?
Great, Kaylie. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm so happy to have you join us. And thank you so much for coming in and talking about your findings on the Talent Retention Report, which was just published, I believe, in September. So fresh. And to our audiences listening, if you're interested in that report, you can visit the NSWERS website, NSWERS.org.
Yeah, org.
But I guess we'll go ahead and just dive on in. I'm eager to hear a little bit more. So David, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at NSWERS.
Okay, so I'll start off just briefly talking about exactly what NSWERS is and what we do. And so first off, we're what's called a state longitudinal data system. And so essentially what we are is a legislatively created research collaborative between education and workforce systems in Nebraska. And so specifically what that means is that we're a partnership between, for instance, Nebraska Department of Education, the 6 community colleges in Nebraska, public community colleges, the Nebraska State College System, and University of Nebraska System, and we're affiliated with the Department of Labor in the state. And so what that means is we have access to a lot of data from across K-12 into post-secondary and into the workforce. And so the purpose of this is that we're designed to help Nebraska make better data-informed decisions. And so because we have this information as people transition through education into the workforce, we can see how well our education system's preparing our students for, say, college, and how well is college preparing our students for the workforce. And so that's kind of just the basic gist of what NSWERS does as an entity. Specifically what I do there as a data scientist as well, that term is always it's thrown around a lot. It's unclear to anybody, including myself, what it actually means. It seems like everybody does different stuff. So for me specifically, what I work on is mostly a lot of research. And so for instance, what we're talking about today is some of the research I've done on talent retention. And so that's research focused on both education and workforce outcomes in our state. Some of the other work that I do is consulting with either partners or other third parties where they're trying to answer questions about either education or workforce development needs in our state. And so working with them to provide some kind of data or potentially even evaluating some kinds of programs they have in place where they're trying to affect some sort of education outcome, like increasing the number of students who go to college, or trying to improve some sort of workforce outcome like talent retention or wages and things like that.
Well, with brain drain being such a large conversation in our state, and really, I mean, everywhere right now with our different workforce numbers changing, this kind of work is so important. And so it's really cool that you get to do this as well as help other folks who want to find solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited about this work.
Well, we'll go ahead and start off with just maybe a brief summary of your findings, and then we'll kind of dive in a little bit into each of those.
Yeah, absolutely. So first to start off with is what do we mean by when we say talent retention? And so specifically what we're looking at is when people graduate from college, do they stay and work in Nebraska? And so the way we define that is within the 2 years after they graduate, do we see them work at least a year here, right? We leave a little bit of a gap for them to maybe it takes some time for them to find work. But essentially we're looking at, are they staying and working in Nebraska after graduating? And what we're looking at is graduates from between about 2015 to 2020 at the time. The purpose of this report is to look at what kinds of characteristics are associated with those college graduates who choose to stay and work in Nebraska after graduating versus those who don't. And that's really important for a better understanding what kinds of solutions we could use to resolve these brain drain issues, right? Because unless you know why people are leaving, if you just know lots of people are leaving, it's important for knowing that it's a problem, but it doesn't really tell you about what to do. And so that's what we sought out in this report to do, is try to figure out what kinds of factors are related to why people might choose to stay here or choose to leave. And so we have a couple of big findings. So one of them is that we find that it seems that graduates that have social and economic ties to our state are more likely to stay here compared to those who don't. So specifically what I mean by that is when we look at students who are from Nebraska, right, they graduated high school in Nebraska, we see that they're about twice as likely to stay in Nebraska after graduating college compared to those who are not from Nebraska. And so that's about 40% versus 80% in terms of talent retention overall.
Wow.
We also find that having work experience in our state is really strongly associated with staying and working in Nebraska as well. And so we think these two things are probably the result of, one, if you grew up in Nebraska, you have these existing social ties. And we know that family reasons are a really key driver for why people choose to stay in a state or leave a state. And second of all, we also know that work opportunities are really big for whether people choose to stay or leave a state. And so having some level of work experience in the state could help create, maybe some sort of networking opportunities for them to create that connection that'll help them land that first job in Nebraska instead of somewhere else so that they decide to stay and work here. And that's essentially what happened to me. I came here for grad school. I finished my master's in statistics and I got a job here at NSWERS. And so that's a big part of why I've stuck around.
Yeah. Well, we hope you like Nebraska so far.
It's great.
Good. What kind of inspired, I know you talked about the purpose of this group, but the specific report, kind of what inspired you to focus on this talent retention piece? You obviously have some experience. Was there anything else that maybe encouraged or excited you about this specific report?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say the biggest one is that this is just, it's a very timely topic. As you pointed out, this is a issue that a lot of states face, particularly in the Midwest, which is, the brain drain or the loss of college-educated workers from our state. And so we thought that it was really important, and a lot of our partners are really interested in this topic. And of course, at the state level, there's a lot of initiatives to try to reduce or reverse brain drain. For instance, Intern Nebraska, which is a program to help subsidize and incentivize internships in Nebraska and hopefully help students, stay and work here after they graduate, as well as, Governor's task force on improving workforce development.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've really enjoyed getting to see the growth of both of those programs, as well as supporting them and helping folks. And by folks, I mean employers as well as students engage with both of those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to dive into kind of each finding, and you spoke briefly about this, but we're going to go ahead and just dive into kind of each of your findings. But your report highlights the importance of these social and economic ties. Can you elaborate on maybe specific supports or policies that could help strengthen those ties, especially for someone who may not be in state?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So a lot of our educational institutions, they serve different kinds of students, and they also offer different programs to them. So it's a little bit hard to say, here's these specific things you can do. It's not I'm just a data scientist. What do I know about that? But I do think that our research findings point towards the kinds of supports people might want to think about in terms of the effect that they might have, right? So if you think about how can an educational institution, help their students build economic ties to the area? Well, are there ways that they can incentivize or support students who want to find internships? Is every student there that wants to get an internship, are they able to find one? And what kinds of things can they do in terms of advising or providing more opportunities to help them achieve those? In terms of social support, I'm not sure that there's much that colleges already aren't doing, because there's already a lot of things to help students, integrate in the community. So I think continuing that kind of work could be really important. But I do think that probably an area that there could be more growth in would be that economic ties piece. So helping make sure to promote taking internships and getting that kind of workplace experience, regardless of whether they choose to stay in Nebraska, which we hope they do, but even if they go somewhere else, right? Having an internship is really important.
Absolutely.
For helping build their work history and work experience. So just creating those opportunities for them to find those internships and connect to really meaningful internships, I think would be key.
Absolutely. And it sounds like maybe even the community or employers themselves can help with that social ties aspect, where the college has already done a great job. what sort of things are we doing outside of that in order to make sure folks feel right at home in our backyard?
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine that because it's not just about having an internship or doing something like that, but probably the quality of that internship really matters. So making
Absolutely.
sure that employers, when they offer these internships, it's not just, making coffee, copying papers, which I don't know, do people copy papers anymore?
I hope not.
Yeah.
I hope that's not a main task, at least. We all understand
Mhm.
it could be the part of a process of a task, but
Yeah, but absolutely, like maybe having some sort of activities where they go into the community or like social kinds of hours and things like that, where it can really help them build not just the work experience, but also the social ties to Nebraska.
absolutely. Those are cool. I like that finding, and I think that is something so huge. Even when you say family keeps people around, it's true. You hear of people who grew up here that move away and they come back. So that's, yeah, you don't realize, I think, how much strength and weight a social tie and like those economic ties early on weigh on a person's decision. So it's very cool to see these things. Your next finding was degree fields and retention rates. Your data shows that retention rates across all sorts of degree fields. Could you discuss why fields like STEM, which are crucial to Nebraska, why do they have maybe some lower rates?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of our findings is, as you mentioned, that depending on the degree field somebody earned their degree in or certificate, that really impacts how likely they are to stay and work in Nebraska. And so as a great example, one of the degree fields with the lowest talent retention rates is STEM, so science, technology, engineering, math, and that's hovering at about 50%. So like half of our STEM graduates are leaving the state.
Wow.
On the other hand, we see that for other kinds of degree areas like manufacturing, they have some of the highest talent retention rates. So about 80% are choosing to stay and work here in Nebraska after they graduate with their certificate or degree. And we think that this could be due to two reasons. So one of them just has to do with what kinds of people are ending up in that program. And so one of the things is that, for instance, if you compare manufacturing to STEM, lots more out-of-state students are going to be in that group of STEM graduates, right? We get a lot of those STEM graduates are from the University of Nebraska system, and so it's a great system, and so people from out of state go there, and they're just less likely to stay and work in Nebraska afterwards. So a lot of those STEM graduates are just from out of state; they're less likely to stay, and that's going to drag down the talent retention rate for STEM just because lots of them are not from our state.
Okay.
We also see in our report that if you break it down by where, for instance, a STEM graduate comes from, in-state versus out-of-state, we can see that the in-state students have a much higher talent retention rate than the out-of-state talent retention rate. And so we can see there that it's really part of this is the composition of how many of them are from in-state versus out-of-state. The second thing that I think points more towards exactly the kind of degree or certificate they have is this is probably related to the kinds of job opportunities that are available in our state. So one general finding in just the literature at large is that work opportunities are really important. So if there's higher wage jobs available out of state, people are more likely to leave to take those jobs. And so it may be the case that for certain fields, for instance, in STEM, there simply aren't as many jobs available or they're relatively lower paying compared to other states, and that may motivate people to leave Nebraska to work somewhere else. So I think that's the second reason why we see those lower rates for something like STEM.
That's super interesting. And also, I mean, it seems to make sense, especially when you talk about the makeup of those fields already as being out-of-state students. I hope that, going forward in the future, we can, as a community of educators, economic developers, employers, we can figure out how to really bridge that gap here. Because as we know, the STEM field is continuing to grow at exponential rates, and we definitely need people in our workforce here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And last but not least, you had enhancing in-state work opportunities, and you've touched on this a little bit with internships. But how do you think, and if you don't have a perfect answer to this, that's totally okay, but how can businesses and educational institutions collaborate to kind of create some of these meaningful opportunities for students?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think so there's a couple of components to this, right? Which is one, like increasing access to internships. And so one of those things is just really trying to match between students and internships that would be valuable to them and that they would succeed at. And so that could be one opportunity for partnership is between, for instance, individual businesses or potentially groups of businesses or industries to try to work with, say, programs or departments that they really want interns from. Absolutely. And work with them to create these pipelines from that program potentially into internships for that industry. Another aspect that could be there is trying to improve the quality of these internship programs because probably there is an effect of, how much a student learns during that internship. Are they able to actually apply the things that they learned in the classroom towards their work, or are they doing kind of busy work that doesn't really contribute to their career? So making sure that internships are high quality too. So I think that those are probably two big things that could help out with improving the opportunities for people to have internships in Nebraska and also consequently be more likely to stay and work here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as education and employers continue to work together and give each other feedback, I think finding the solutions to those problems will be a lot easier rather than just kind of trying to work on their own.
Yeah, hopefully.
I just have a couple questions left. Are there any lessons that, just based on the data that you've seen, that Nebraska can learn from other states facing similar challenges?
Yeah, so there are absolutely a lot of other states that face similar challenges, particularly in the Midwest. And most of the solutions that people have put forward and have implemented for trying to resolve things like workforce shortages and brain drain, they kind of fall along about three categories. So the first of those would be providing scholarships to incentivize students to, go to college in their state and pursue certain types of degrees, for instance, STEM, things that are in high demand. Second would be internship programs. So for instance, Nebraska's Intern Nebraska program, that is designed to help essentially improve talent retention rates in Nebraska by subsidizing internships in Nebraska. And so that's one example of an internship-based kind of approach. And the third would be sort of more of a general economic development approach where, by developing the economy, you're going to hopefully stimulate the production of more jobs and better paying jobs. And as that point earlier, I talked about how, potentially with STEM, the reason why we see more of them leaving is just that there aren't really the availability of jobs, especially jobs that pay well, potentially in Nebraska, to keep them here. And so those are a couple of pathways that people have taken to try to reduce that brain drain issue. With that said, those are all things Nebraska is currently or has tried. And so I think a really important lesson, though, to take from this is not necessarily that there's really special approaches that are new or innovative that will suddenly change the game of how we can, retain people to stay in our state and work here. I think a big part of this is being able to actually evaluate each of those policies or practices and see how well do they work so we can better prioritize which ones we want to try to invest in. And so that's something that NSWERS is a big part of in our ability to evaluate programs, especially programs like these where it's about that transition from college and into the workplace. What kinds of things can, potentially help resolve some of that leaky pipeline in terms of keeping people here in Nebraska?
Yeah, you kind of answered my last question, which was how can we look at these things and figure out solutions? And I think you're right. There's a lot of really cool stuff already being done. How can we look at how it's working, tweak it, use data like this in order to really find some of those like, I don't know, maybe potential new different ways of doing things.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that that's potentially a competitive advantage that Nebraska could have is if we're able to better evaluate the programs that we try, because everybody is trying lots of different things to try to resolve this issue. It's not that it's not that nobody's trying to do it. So people are trying lots of things, and if we can do a good job of evaluating which of these things works and which of these things works potentially better than some of the other options that we've tried, we can focus our efforts to hopefully have more efficacious ways of resolving this issue, and that can give us a competitive edge over some of the other states that are also dealing with these brain drain issues.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed.
Absolutely.
That we take a look at this data and use it wisely. I definitely enjoyed the report, and I thought it was really insightful, and this conversation has also been super insightful. So, David, thank you so much for joining us again today and, diving into the report and sharing some of these valuable insights. I know I really enjoyed it. And I look forward to sharing this out with our network so they can, be more aware of NSWERS and the great work you're doing, and also how important talent retention is for the state. If you want to check out the report, please head over to nswers.org, NSWERS.org, and have a great day.